Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the water. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind, on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kind, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, on the third day. And God said, "Let there be light in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and for years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the night from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the seas, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seeds in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. There are a couple of points I would like to make before I dig deeper into the creation story. The first one is that atheists and Muslims, for centuries and centuries and centuries, have tried to make the claim that the Trinity came about years after the death of Jesus. Well, you can see right here in Genesis chapter 1, in the very first page of the Bible, in the very first paragraph of the Bible, is mentioned God the Father and the Spirit. But if you look at chapter 1, verse 26, where it says, "And then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness." This does not say the Spirit again. It is a separate entity, someone like God. someone equal to God, someone very much like Jesus Christ. The second point I would like to make is that in Genesis chapter 1, if you listen, there are two creations of light. The first one is almost like God putting a light over his workbench, turning it on so that he can see what he's doing. The second one, he specifically mentions the sun, the moon, and the stars. The reason that I put in the image a picture of a spiritual light, a light like God, is for one simple reason. That goes back to the book of Revelations, chapter 21, verses 22 through 27. And I saw no temple in the city, for its temple is the Lord God the Almighty and the Lamb. And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and its lamp is the Lamb. By its light will the nations walk, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. And its gates will never be shut by day, and there will be no night there. They will bring into it the glory and the honor of the nations, but nothing unclean will ever enter it, nor anything who does what is detestable or false, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. So that's on the very last page of the Bible. And I do think it gives a clear idea that God himself is light. When we get to heaven, God will be the only light, and there will be no night, for the glory of God will shine all day long. That is why I use that image in slide 3. Now that we've cleared up those two slides and the two different stories of the creation of light, I would like to quickly turn to another passage of the Bible where God talks about his creation, and that's the book of Job, chapter 38. If you're unfamiliar with the book of Job, let me give you a quick rundown. Job was both a righteous man and a very rich man. And God made a deal with Satan, saying, "You can take everything from Job, but he will not blame me for it, and he will not turn from me because of it." Job has 3 friends that come to comfort him, but they are very bad comforters. And after chapter of back and forth between Job and his friends, where Job's friends accuse him of being a sinner, that's why God must be punishing him, God gets tired of the back and forth and intervenes. Here is what God says. "What is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determines its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? Or what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstones? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it, and set bars and doors, and said, Thus far you shall come, and no further, and here shall your proud waves be stayed. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the skirts of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? It is charged like clay under the seal, and its features stand out like garment. From the wicked their light is withheld, and their uplifted arm is broken. Have you entered into the springs of the sea, or walked into the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Declare, if you know all of this. So there is God once again taking great claim for his creation that he's very proud of, only further backing up the claims of Genesis chapter 1. I would like to speak a little bit on why I am a creationalist. True story. One day I was sitting at home watching television, and breaking news came on. There was this scientist in the United States that had created a box. And inside of this box was no matter, no air, no molecules. It was absolutely nothing. And the point of this experiment was to show that something could come from nothing, that over time, this little bit of matter would start to appear, and that it would grow. But before the experiment even started, it's one of the silliest things I've ever seen. I had the question that we've all had since the very beginning of time. Who built the box? Who built the box? Now I'd like to address a couple of things here about creation. Number one, There is nothing in Genesis chapter 1 that says that we are on a young earth or an old earth. To say one way or the other is mere speculation. God uses the word day in several different contexts throughout the Bible. It can mean a literal 24-hour day, or it can mean a time period, like the day of the Lord, the day of Israel, the days of Elijah, the days of Moses. It's used both ways many times, and we do not know the answer to what it means in Genesis chapter 1. The other thing I would like to address is over the years something has come to fruition named Christian evolutionists. Now, I will admit, book in Genesis chapter 1, the creation of animals does come before the creation of man. But I will also say that there is no scripture in the entire Bible that references one coming from the other, that there is an evolutionary period where animal becomes man. In fact, God made it very clear that he made man separately to rule over all animals on the earth. Even Darwin himself and Dawkins both admit that the theory of evolution in no way explains the beginning of the earth or the beginning of life. And there is also a big problem with evolution in regards to the fossil records. We do not have fossils showing how animals evolved from one creature to the next. Not enough to make it absolutely clear that that is how we came about. So as for me, I'm going to stick to the scripture and strictly what the scripture says, which is that man was created separate. And when we get to Genesis chapter 2, God's going to get a little bit more descriptive about how he created man. And I do think that rules out the idea of Christian evolution. But what I do believe is one more chapter that I would like to read to you. Here in this Romans chapter 1, verse 20, that once again deals with God's opinion of his creation. I'll start in verse 18, because I always like to take the longer version instead of reading you specific verses, because I never want to be blamed for taking the Bible out of context. So let's start with Romans chapter 1, verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of man, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they know God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. That's God saying the proof of his existence is in his creation. John Lennox, one of the world's most renowned mathematicians from Cambridge University, once started one of his debates by saying the following: I believe in the supernatural God. The original scientists saw no contradiction between faith in God and the excellence in natural inquiry. They started science because they expected laws in nature, because they believed in the lawgiver. Choosing between God and science is like choosing between Henry Ford and engineering in the creation of the automobile. It's only been in recent times that we've become so desperate to show that something came from nothing. It was not the original idea of scientists. Here's some original scientists that did believe in God: Albert Einstein, Compton, Pascal, Haeckel, Baron. And back to the words of John Lennon, just one more time. It is more rational to believe God created all things than that all things were created by nothing. Science and God are not at odds. They have never been at odds, which is another reason why I'm a creationist. It is only in recent years, since we really got advanced technology, and even back into the 70s and 80s, they thought this advanced technology would easily disprove God. But here we are again in the year 2024, and nothing affirmative has come out that there was a different creation other than the one mentioned in Genesis chapter 1. In conclusion, instead of going over many more reasons why I'm a creationist, for example, Did you know that the gravitational pull of the Earth is set in the exact precise location to allow for life? If it was 1 centimeter to the left or right, we would not exist. Have you ever considered our distance to the sun? One slight move forward or backwards, and we would either burn to death or freeze to death. What about the electromagnetic pull and the gravitational pull? One small change, and we do not exist. Have you ever thought about the complexity of the human mind, or the amount of data stored in the human cell? To think all of these things came by chance is unlikely. But I would like to leave you with the words of Francis Collins, the director of the group that successfully completed the Genome Project, and why he decided to believe in a God.
Chronology as it actually happened, but let me summarize for you the kinds of arguments that ultimately brought me around to the position of recognizing that belief in God was an entirely satisfying intellectually event, but also something that I was increasingly discovering I had a spiritual hunger for. And interestingly, some of the pointers to God had been in front of me all along, coming from the study of nature. And I hadn't really thought about them, but here they were. Here's one which seems like an obvious statement, but maybe it's not so obvious. There is something instead of nothing. No reason that should be. This phrase of Wigner, the Nobel laureate in physics, caught my eye because I had been involved, of course, as a graduate student working with quantum mechanics with Schrodinger's equation. And one of the things that had appealed to me so much about mathematics and physics and chemistry was how it was that this particular kind of depiction of matter and energy works. I mean, it really works well. And a theory that is correct often turns out to be simple and beautiful. And why should that be? Why should mathematics be so unreasonably effective in describing nature? There's the Big Bang. The fact that the universe had a beginning, as virtually all scientists are now coming to the conclusion, about 13.7 billion years ago, in an unimaginable singularity, where the universe, smaller than a golf ball, suddenly appeared and then began flying apart and has been flying apart ever since. And we can calculate that singularity by noticing just how far those galaxies are receding from us and things like the background microwave radiation, the echo of that Big Bang. And of course, that presents a difficulty because our science cannot look back beyond that point. And it seems that something came out of nothing. Well, nature isn't supposed to allow that. So if nature's not able to create itself, how did the universe get here? You can't postulate that that was created by some natural force, or you haven't solved the problem, because then, okay, what created that natural force? So the only plausible, it seemed to me, explanation is that there must be some supernatural force that did the creating. And of course, that force would not need to be limited by space or even by time. Oh, now we're getting somewhere. So, all right, let's imagine there is a creator, let's call that creator God, who is supernatural, who's not bounded by space, not bounded by time, and is a pretty darn good mathematician. And it's starting to make some sense here. Well, God must also be an incredible physicist. Because another thing I began to realize by a little more reading is that there is this phenomenal fine-tuning of the universe that makes complexity and therefore life possible. Those of you who study physics and chemistry will know that there's a whole series of laws that govern the behavior of matter and energy. They are simple, beautiful equations, but they have constants in them, like the gravitational constant or the speed of light. And you cannot derive at the present time the value of those constants. They are what they are. They're givens. You have to do the experiment and measure them. Well, suppose they were a little different. Would that matter? Would anything change in our universe if the gravitational constant was a little stronger or a little weaker? Some days I think it's a little stronger, but I don't think it really is. So that calculation got done, particularly in the 1970s, by Barrow and Tipler. And the answer was astounding. That if you take any of these 15 constants and you tweak them just a tiny little bit, the whole thing doesn't work anymore. Take gravity, for instance. If gravity was just 1 part in about 10 billion weaker than it actually is, then after the Big Bang, there would be insufficient gravitational pull to result in the coalescence of stars and galaxies and planets and you and me. And you'd end up, therefore, with a infinitely expanding sterile universe. If gravity was just a tiny bit stronger, well, things would coalesce all right, but a little too soon. And the Big Bang would be followed after a while by a big crunch, and we would not have the chance to appear because the timing wouldn't be right. And that's just one example. You can't look at that data and not marvel at it. It is astounding to see the knife edge of improbability upon which our existence exists. So what's that about? Well, I can think of three possibilities. First of all, maybe theory will someday tell us that these constants have to have the value they have, that there is some a priori reason for that. Most physicists I talk to don't think that's too likely. There might be relationships between them that have to be maintained, but not the whole thing. A second possibility, perhaps we are one of an almost infinite series of other universes that have different values of those constants. And of course, we have to be in the one where everything turned out right, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. So that's the multiverse hypothesis, and it is a defensible one as long as you're willing to accept the fact that you will probably never be able to observe those infinite series of other parallel universes. So that requires quite a leap of faith. The third possibility is that this is intentional, that these constants have the value they do because that creator God, who is a good mathematician, also knew that there was an important set of dials to set here if this universe that was coming into being was going to be interesting. So take those three possibilities, and which of them seems most plausible? Apply Occam's razor, if you will, which says that the simplest explanation is most likely correct. Well, I come down on number three, especially because I've already kind of gotten there in terms of the other arguments about the idea of a creator. And this is interesting, but of course, so far, how far have we gotten? We've gotten to Einstein's God now, because Einstein certainly marveled at the way in which mathematics worked. Einstein was not aware, as far as we know, of the fine-tuning arguments at quite this level, but probably would have embraced them in the same way. But we haven't really gotten to a theist God yet. We've gotten to a deist God. So how do we get there? Well, now we come back to Lewis in that first chapter of Mere Christianity, which is called Right and Wrong as a Clue to the Meaning of the Universe. And here what is being talked about is the moral law. I didn't take philosophy in college, so I didn't really quite know what this was all about. But as I began to recognize what the argument was, it rang true. It rang true in a really startling way. One of those things where you realize, I've known about this all my life, but I've never really quite thought about it. So what's the argument? The argument is that we humans are unique in the animal kingdom by apparently having a law that we are under, although we seem free to break it because that happens every day. And the law is that there's something called right and there's something called wrong, and we're supposed to do the right thing and not the wrong thing. Again, we break that law. When we do, what do? We make an excuse, which only means we believe the law must be true and we're trying to be let off the hook. Now, people will quickly object, now wait a minute. I can think of human cultures that did terrible things. How can you say they were under the moral law? Well, if you go and study those cultures, you will find out that the things that we consider terrible were in their column called right because of various cultural expectations. So clearly the moral law is universal, but it is influenced in terms of particular actions and how they size up in the right and wrong assessment. Well, the moral law sometimes calls us to do some pretty dramatic things, particularly in terms of altruism, where you do something sacrificial for somebody else. And what about that? People may argue, and they have, and they will continue to, that this can all be explained by evolution, and those are useful arguments to look at. So, for instance, if you're being altruistic to your own family, you can see how that might make sense from an evolutionary perspective because they share your DNA. So if you're helping their DNA survive, well, it's yours too. And so that makes sense from a Darwinian argument about reproductive fitness. If you are being nice to somebody in expectation they'll be nice to you later, a reciprocal form of altruism, well, okay, you can see how that might also make sense in terms of benefiting your reproductive success. You can even make arguments, as Martin Nowak has at Harvard, that if you do computer modeling of things like the prisoner's dilemma, you can come up with motivations for entire groups to behave altruistically toward each other. But a consequence of that, and all the other models that have been put together, is that you still have to be hostile to people who are not in your group. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart as far as the evolutionary drive for successful competition. Well, does that fit? Is that what we see in our own experience? Where are those circumstances where we think the moral law has been most dramatically at work? I would submit they are not when we're being just nice to our family, or just nice to people who are going to be nice to us, or even just when we're being nice to other people in our own group. The things that strike us, that cause us to marvel and to say, that's what human nobility is all about, are when that radical altruism extends beyond those categories. When you see Mother Teresa and the streets of Calcutta picking up the dying. When you see Oskar Schindler risking his life to save Jews from the Holocaust. When you see the Good Samaritan. Or when you see Wesley Autry. Wesley Autry, a construction worker, African-American, standing on the subway platform in New York City. And next to him, a young man, a graduate student, went into an epileptic seizure. And to the horror of everybody standing there, the student fell onto the tracks in front of an oncoming train. With only a split second to make a decision, Wesley jumped onto the tracks as well, pulled the student, still having the seizure, in that small space in between the tracks, covered him with his own body, and the train rolled over both of them. And miraculously, there was just enough clearance for them both to survive. And here's a picture of the next day, as Wesley describes the situation, standing next to the young man's father. This was clearly radical altruism. These people were of no acquaintance of each other, had no likelihood of seeing each other in any other circumstance, and belonged to different groups as we seem to define them here in our society, one being African American, one being white. And yet, New York went crazy, and they should. What an amazing act. What an amazing, risky thing to do. Now, evolution would say, Wesley, what were you thinking? Talk about ruining your reproductive fitness opportunities. This is a scandal, isn't it? So think about that. Again, I'm not offering you a proof, but I do think when people try to argue that morality can be fully explained on evolutionary grounds, that's a little bit too easy. That's a little bit too much of a just so story. And perhaps it might ought to be thought about as potentially having some other reflected reason for its presence. And I would ask the question, because Lewis asked it in his chapter, if you were looking not just for evidence of a God who was a mathematician and a physicist, but a God who cared about human beings and who stood for what was good and holy and wanted his people to also be interested in what is good and holy. Wouldn't it be interesting to find written in your own heart this moral law, which doesn't otherwise make sense and which is calling you to do just that?
I take you once again to Romans chapter 1. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world.